This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. It would have been considered all but unthinkable 2 years ago, but several hundred Soviet officials met in Moscow today to lay groundwork for organizing what amounts to an opposition political party. It is still in the embryo stage, but if it comes about, it will mean the communists in power will face their first organized opposition in nearly 70 years. CBS News Moscow correspondent Barry Peterson has the story.
They are daring to challenge a decades-old fundamental communist rule banning opposition factions. Their way around it, call this a horse by some other name. It's an open group, insisted political maverick Boris Yeltsin. Anyone can come and speak. But Yeltsin and other deputies from the new Soviet Congress were clearly here as founding fathers of a radical bloc within the Soviet parliament. Yeltsin is among those favored to become the leader of this group at elections tomorrow. The party, said Yeltsin, is no longer made up of workers and others. It has become a privileged class unto itself. Yeltsin pointed to the recent miners' strike as a sign of deep dissatisfaction with decades of uncaring party rule. One change, proposed Yeltsin, direct elections for this nation's leaders and the right of impeachment. Some attacked not just the party, but communism itself. Marxism-Leninism, said well-known Soviet historian Yuri Afanasyev, is not capable of pulling us out of crisis. For his sentiments, cheers from supporters outside and calming words from those who say this is not a challenge to Mikhail Gorbachev.
Of course it's opposition, but many people thought it's not opposition to Gorbachev. It's opposition to those who want to push him back.
Gorbachev had no apparent role in today's events, although many here are his longtime supporters. And if he doesn't endorse what they're saying or doing, he runs the risk of being a leader who has fallen behind the cutting edge of his own reforms. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
Planning appears to be well along for a superpower summit between President Bush and Soviet leader Gorbachev. In Paris, Secretary of State James Baker and Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze met for 3 hours today and said the two leaders could meet, in Shevardnadze's phrase, rather soon, if all goes well. In Warsaw, Wojciech Jaruzelski resigned today as head of Poland's Communist Party. Jaruzelski had promised to quit as party leader after he was elected president last week. The Central Committee immediately elected outgoing Prime Minister Rakowski to the party leadership. China said today that nearly 200,000 books have been seized and dozens of bookstalls closed in a censorship crackdown. In Chicago, delegates representing thousands of Chinese students at American universities planned another protest strategy today. Bruce Morton reports.
The Chinese students, delegates from 182 schools, were doing something they've never done back home, debating and voting on a new constitution, 35 articles, 8 handwritten Xeroxed pages for their group. He's asking, how do you fill out the ballot? But they did fill them out, and John Ding announced the result.
125票.
Delegates from 125 schools in favor, 28 against, 29 not voting. The All-American Chinese Students and Scholars Independent Union was born. So the Chinese Students Organization is official now, with a brand new name, a new constitution. The question is, how effective can it be?
It certainly helps us to push forward the democratic movement in China. It fits into our goal of having a more pluralistic society in China.
I think it is possible that they will have more of an impact in the United States and in other Western societies, other democracies, than they will have in a relatively closed China.
They really aren't people who want to be outside of China. They are people who want to be at home having an impact.
The dilemma that they will have to face, how to maintain credibility, how to maintain effectiveness as basically Chinese in exile overseas.
What will they do next? This afternoon, they debated and voted on a whole series of proposals. 2 that passed urge a boycott of the next Asian Games, due to be held in Beijing next year, and organize a march in Washington October 1st, a national holiday back home. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Chicago.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the state of morale at the Department of State, and later Betsy Aaron on first-time mothers and the times of their lives. The post-Khomeini era in Iran began today with a lopsided winner in the election for president. The results open the way for what many hope will be a new spirit of cooperation with former enemies. Martha Teichner's in London with a report.
Today's vote count, carried out painstakingly by hand, merely confirmed what was a foregone conclusion, that Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani would be elected president of Iran by an overwhelming majority. Iranian voters also approved constitutional changes that will give Rafsanjani sweeping powers that could result in a new openness with the West, even the United States.
I think Rafsanjani will be looking for a way of freeing at least some of the hostages, particularly American hostages.
Whether Terry Anderson and other hostages held in Lebanon will be freed depends on how far Rafsanjani dares to push relations with the West in order to bail out his country's economy, in ruins after the Iran-Iraq War and 10 years of the Ayatollah Khomeini's rule. In his only campaign appearance on Iranian television, Rafsanjani skipped the hysterical revolutionary rhetoric characteristic of Khomeini's speeches. Instead, he told voters the economy was in chaos, riddled with corruption, his #1 priority. Just 3 weeks after Khomeini's death, Rafsanjani signed a $15 billion deal with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The Soviets will build factories in Iran in return for natural gas. But the Soviet Union cannot supply either the technology or the cash Iran's economy needs. The West can. Rafsanjani's challenge, how to establish economic ties with the West without turning hardline followers of Ayatollah Khomeini against him, a political juggling act that will test his reputation as a pragmatist.
Like any other politician, a good politician, he will do whatever is necessary. If it means improved relations with the West, then that is what he will do. Not because he is a moderate, not because he's a liberal, but because he's a politician.
Middle East analysts say that if Rafsanjani miscalculates or moves too fast, there will be a fundamentalist backlash, and the Ayatollah Khomeini will overrule him from the grave. Martha Teichner, CBS News, London.
Iran's Prime Minister Mousavi said today that Israel's kidnapping of a senior Hezbollah cleric in Lebanon will have a negative effect on the fate of the hostages. Israel today warned the pro-Iranian Hezbollah not to harm the hostages. Meanwhile, the Hezbollah ruled out any prisoner swap for the abducted cleric, who's been linked to the kidnapping of U.S. Marine Colonel William Higgins. It's been another day of false starts and contradictory impressions in relations between Israelis and Palestinians. Bob Simon now with that story.
Palestinian children in the occupied territories finished their first week of school today in almost 20 months. The Israeli authorities opened the schools last Saturday, which have been kept closed constantly since the Intifada began. The Israelis could claim they were being liberal and humane and attentive to international opinion. The Palestinians could claim they had won a victory without a single concession. They had not promised to stop the protests. They had given no guarantees of calm. It has been a week of claims and counterclaims. Prime Minister Shamir has been meeting with local Palestinian leaders. He claims he is not dealing with a PLO, which he refuses to recognize because he claims it is a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. One West Bank Palestinian admitted that he'd met the Prime Minister and suggested where he'd sent his report.
Everybody has to know the truth, that nothing happened in the occupied territories without the knowledge of PLO.
The American ambassador got into the act last week, making an unusual trip to Gaza to talk to Palestinians, encouraging them to accept the Israeli proposal for local elections.
The more we have of these dialogues, the more we will become nearer to serious business.
There are the occasional examples of diminishing tensions these days, even the odd outbreak of converging interests. The Palestinians and the Israelis both need to maintain a certain appearance of dialogue. This is possible as long as two questions are studiously avoided. Where is it all going, and how do we get there? A group of Arabs and left-wing Israelis went to the West Bank village of Nahalin today to commemorate the 6 Palestinians who were killed there by Israeli border police on the 13th of April. It was a day of dialogue, but it was also the West Bank, which meant that there were stones and children and soldiers. Good intentions often end this way in these parts. Before they agree to the Israeli offer of elections, the Palestinians want some guarantees about how that will end. An Israeli willingness to trade land for peace, for example. But any Israeli government that made that kind of promise now, or any time soon, would not be governing very long. Bob Simon, CBS News, Television.
Now, new scientific tests prove Heart's Blockade Repellent gives your pet total protection against fleas and ticks, or your money back. Unsolicited, here's what some satisfied Blockade users have told us.
Our dog suffers with fleas, and even dipping doesn't help. Last summer, we tried Blockade. I want to thank you and tell you how much I appreciate this product. It really does work.
We were having a terrible time with fleas until we found Blockade. Since using it, we've had great results, and it smells so good.
Heart's Blockade, guaranteed flea and tick protection that really works.
Ever since Unisom, people have abandoned their old sleep medicine because medical tests prove people fall asleep faster and sleep better all night with Unisom than without. Take Unisom for faster, better sleep.
When you've got hemorrhoids, walking is hard. Sitting, worse. Anusol has an anesthetic for the pain and itch of hemorrhoids. Prep H doesn't. Anusol has an anesthetic to take the hurt out of hemorrhoids.
Dear Malox, my daughter's date's give me Malox moments.
Hey, I'm here!
Last night was a real doozy. What a Malox moment. My stomach did flip-flops. Good thing Extra Strength Malox Plus is so strong. My doctor recommended it, and it's the strongest antacid I can.
Felix Bloch, the American diplomat who's been accused of spying for Moscow but still has not been charged, took his dog for a walk in Chappaqua, New York today as a horde of law enforcement officers and photographers trailed in his wake. Although he's under around-the-clock surveillance by authorities, the status of the case remains unclear. Whatever turn it takes, the case is the latest blow to the morale of professionals at the State Department. And in our Washington Notebook tonight, we focus on why, hearing first from the department's number 2 man, Lawrence Eagleberger.
The morale issue, look, I spent 27 years in the Foreign Service myself. I do not recall a time when there wasn't some conversation about the morale in the State Department.
Even before the case of Felix Bloch became news, America's career diplomats were down in the dumps. The State Department has been besieged with complaints and lawsuits alleging discrimination against women and minorities. And now, on top of all that, professional diplomats say too many top diplomatic posts are going to non-professionals. In Congress this week, the professionals found some sympathy on that front.
One looks through this resume wondering, why has this person been nominated for this important position? The answer, of course, is to be found in the appendix, which lists the campaign contributions.
Sarbanes released a study showing 68% of George Bush's nominees are political appointees, more non-professionals than any previous president has appointed. The State Department's top command argues those figures are misleading.
That he has decided that career ambassadors now in post will stay there and complete their tours. So if you take the total number, it's 65% to 35%, which is higher than it was when the last administration left office.
And, say outside observers, the president has every right to name his top ambassadors, no matter what the professional diplomats think of them.
When he became president, there were a lot of debts to pay off, and he's paying them off, apparently, with ambassadorial appointments. It's an old tradition in this country, to the victor go the spoils.
Critics argue that tradition also has a downside, that those who lack expertise may make embarrassing gaffes, no matter how well-intentioned they are. Consider Melvin Simbler, approved Tuesday to be ambassador to Australia. He gave $100,000 to the Republican campaign, but readily admitted he knew little about Australia and its people.
That has its impact on the morale of the people who are working for them and their effectiveness. And that's the point where I think you would find the Foreign Service officer saying, this is not working the way it's supposed to.
Others say making the State Department a better place to work will also require the Foreign Service to clean up its own act and stop discriminating against its own.
What the Foreign Service needs is a good swift kick in their striped pants. And you can't expect a lot of things to change until you start changing things at the top.
And that is why 600 women in the service have been notified that they may be entitled to job changes, and why this year's Foreign Service exam was canceled after a court ruled it was discriminatory. On that front, at least, some reform does seem to be on the way. Mohawk Indian Reservation in upstate New York to try to settle a dispute between the tribe and the state. Hundreds of police are surrounding the reservation, and today the Indians and their supporters staged a protest. James Hattori now with that.
Protesters today demanded that the New York State Police end its blockade of the St. Regis Indian Reservation, the scene of an armed standoff between the Mohawk Indian tribe and police, which has dragged on for more than a week. The dispute revolves around gambling on the reservation, a multi-million-dollar-a-year industry and major employer for a tribe with unemployment as high as 30%.
I can understand the state police wanting to do their job, but why don't they let me do mine?
The standoff began 9 days ago when 200 state troopers and FBI agents staged an early morning raid at the reservation. They came to seize slot machines and arrest suspects, but eventually backed off when confronted by tribal members with guns.
All right, you're all set.
Now, state troopers maintain around-the-clock roadblocks because, they say, the reservation isn't safe for visitors.
I can't let you on.
The information we received is that there are people who are visibly armed on the reservation grounds.
There's something going on. Hurry up, wake them up.
On the reservation, a small group of Mohawk Indians has mounted security patrols. They say they were invaded.
Yes, we have weapons. We're not going to deny that. We have to do what we have to do to protect our own, to protect our sovereignty.
The standoff has brought business on the reservation nearly to a halt. All 7 casinos are shut down, slot machines hidden away. But for many Indians, the dispute is not over gambling, but rather their treaty rights.
They don't allow slot machines in New York State. We're saying this is not New York State. We're saying we're a sovereign nation. This is not New York State.
But on gambling, the tribe doesn't speak with one voice. A faction of more traditional Mohawk Indians requested the police crackdown.
Well, gambling isn't part of our culture.
The standoff has been peaceful so far, but without signs of ending soon. A federal mediator who has resolved disputes here before says bringing down the barricades is the first and most important step. James Hattori, CBS News, St. Regis, New York.
Jesse Jackson left his hometown of Chicago today for a new home in Washington. That physical move could foreshadow a political move, as Linda Tyra reports.
Who are you going to vote for?
Run, Jesse, run. That rallying cry launched a presidential campaign, and now Jesse Jackson is hearing it again. Today, as he bid farewell to Chicago, some even suggest Jackson is literally running away, that his political fortunes there are sagging. Jackson is taking his Rainbow Coalition to the nation's capital, moving first to this apartment complex while his house is being remodeled. And it's coincidentally just in time to qualify for the 1990 mayor's race. But right now, Jackson says he's not a candidate.
I have no plans to run for mayor of Washington.
D.C. Mayor Marion Barry, under fire amid allegations of drug use and corruption, won't say if he'll seek re-election. But he could find himself running against a political superstar.
Will the quality of life here be improved once Jackson arrives?
Absolutely.
But insiders say if Jackson does run for mayor, he can't just use it for glamour and political advantage.
Jackson's going to have to come out and talk about not just from the outhouse to the White House. He's going to have to come out and talk about picking up the garbage, fixing the potholes.
Also watching will be a fellow district resident at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, George Bush. His party may find it simpler to portray Democrats as outside the mainstream if Jackson were to become mayor.
I think clearly the Republican parties would use this in every way they possibly can.
Even if Jackson were elected mayor, it wouldn't exclude another presidential bid. It's argued Jackson could use the experience of an elected office, but at the same time, he would be under intense scrutiny for his on-the-job performance. So Washington, D.C. is gaining a famous new resident, but the only predictable thing is that his next move, once he arrives, will be unpredictable. Linda Tyra, CBS News, Washington.
Later in life, some even waiting till their mid-40s. New technology is now making pregnancy at that age more feasible and less risky, even for women who've not had children previously. Betsy Aaron reports.
Just a beautiful looking baby at this time.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
The fetus is 17 weeks old. The mother is 45. He will be her first child.
So the baby's taking the hand up to his face. If a woman is in a healthy state when she decides to get pregnant, the likelihood that she's going to develop a complication is minimal, or at least comparable to a patient that is much younger than she is.
That may be surprising news for women over 35 who believe that pregnancy carried with it very high risk to the mother and to the unborn child. The risks are still there, but an unreleased study by Mount Sinai Hospital in New York found this.
It's fair to say that older women can expect to have more complications during the pregnancy, but that the outcome of the pregnancy is generally quite satisfactory.
I never thought it would be so much fun to have a child. I look forward to laughing with her, to playing with her.
Katie is 5 months old. Her mother is 45. A fashion designer, her career had always come first, followed by a desire to have a child. A new, good marriage made it happen.
Women are choosing to have babies at 45. You can guarantee yourself basically a healthy baby at a very late date. That is new. That makes all the difference in the world.
It is the new technology which makes it possible to monitor pregnancy and to increase fertility. That allows the mature woman to become a mother, and it's happening all over the country.
The vast majority are professional women, but I would say there's a good percentile of them that are also housewives.
But along with the good news is the sobering reality that older mothers do suffer higher probability of miscarriage and possible genetic damage. Before facing those problems, there is the biggest challenge, that of getting pregnant in the first place. 42-year-old Ellen Brennan was a nurse in Chicago, married for 7 years and childless. Then, 10 weeks ago, Catherine arrived. She wasn't an accident. According to her mother, she was a miracle.
In a way, I don't think I was ready to have a child until she came along.
For mature couples who wanted to have children, the feeling was better late than never. For euphoric first-time parents, the feeling is it's never too late. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, New York.
And finally tonight, a word about pilot Alfred Haynes. We thought you'd like to know that his neighbors in Seattle considered him to be a pretty good guy even before he managed to crash land that crippled DC-10 in Iowa last week. And today they presented Captain Haynes with an award, not for landing the plane, but as Washington State Volunteer because of his work as a Little League umpire. Since returning home, Haynes has spent every night at the ballpark talking to old friends and just trying to get his life back to normal. Well, that's the news. Susan Spencer's going to be here tomorrow. Later tonight on West 57th, a look back at the Jonestown mass suicide. I'm Bob Schieffer, CBS News, New York. Good night.
Business, and I've been going for 50 years, and I can't remember one like this.
The Die Hard 500 tomorrow.
This is CBS.